A cold wind blows in the Kremlin now. And no, it's not the Russian winter. Vladimir Putin has just discovered that his bet was completely wrong. He expected Europe to give up, the West to get tired, and time to be on his side. But something happened, something he never imagined possible. Germany made a historic decision, and France and the United Kingdom confirmed it. And now, 800,000 men are getting ready. And the most brutal part, Putin will pay for all of this. Let's start with the miscalculation that destroyed Putin's plan. The Russian leader had a simple strategy. He believed that Europe would get tired, that Europeans would look at their energy bills, see inflation rising, and decide that Ukraine wasn't worth it. Putin's formula was clear. Time plus economic pressure equals Russian victory. But something happened that turned that calculation upside down. Europe didn't get weaker, it got stronger. And it wasn't a small change, it was a complete transformation. When you hear the number 800,000, it might sound abstract. So, let's make it concrete. We're talking about a military force larger than the entire British Army. A mobilization that Europe hadn't seen since the Cold War. And this force has a name: Operation Germany Plan. Now you must be wondering who these people are, where this force comes from. The answer? Well, it's going to surprise you. Because the country leading this mobilization is exactly the one Putin thought would never react. Germany. For decades, Germany was known for caution. After World War II, the country built its identity on pacifism. Avoid conflict, always negotiate, never escalate. When the war in Ukraine started, Germany took months to send helmets. Yes, helmets. Putin saw this and concluded that Germany lacks the will for war. But time showed that he was wrong, because something changed in German society. And it wasn't a small change, it was a profound one. A recent survey showed that 56% of Germans now approve sending troops to Ukraine. Think about that for a moment. More than half of the German population is willing to put their soldiers on Ukrainian soil. That doesn't happen overnight. That means Germany has woken up. German society looked at Russia advancing in Ukraine and thought, if we don't stop this now, we'll be next. And when Germany decides to mobilize, things happen. We're talking about the biggest industrial power in Europe, the machine that produces Mercedes, BMW, and some of the best military equipment in the world. When that machine starts up, it doesn't start up slowly. Germany added 3 billion euros to the defense budget. It's producing Taurus missiles, weapons that can hit targets 500 kilometers away. And most importantly, Berlin has taken on the role of coordinator. The country once afraid of escalation now leads the European response. But Germany is not alone. France and the United Kingdom joined together. The British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, said something that put the Kremlin on alert. British soldiers are ready to set foot on Ukrainian soil as soon as the fighting stops. France, under the leadership of Macron, began to break diplomatic taboos by openly talking about a European military presence in Ukraine. 3 countries, 3 military powers moving together. But at this point, one question is inevitable. Will these soldiers fight against Russia? Wouldn't that be World War III? No. Because the European plan is brilliant. To understand this plan, let me show you a tactical problem that Ukraine has been facing. The Ukrainian army has some of its best brigades, most experienced soldiers, and best trained units. But do you know where these troops are? They're stationed on the border with Belarus, just standing guard, waiting for an attack that might never happen. The reason? Russia and Belarus could open a second front at any moment. So, Ukraine doesn't have much choice. They have to keep those elite troops there, immobilized, while the real war is happening in the Donbass, 600 kilometers to the south. It's like having your best players on the bench while you're in a tough game. Europe looked at this and saw an opportunity. The plan is as follows. European troops take over the northern border, ensure the security of Kyiv, protect the rear, and do the defensive work. And what happens to those elite Ukrainian brigades that were stuck in the north? They are freed, all of them, and they go straight to the front, in the east. Imagine the impact of that. Tens of thousands of experienced soldiers, familiar with the terrain, arrive in the Donbass simultaneously. That changes the balance of power overnight. Europe contributes an entire army without firing a single shot. That's the strategy of the Northern Shield. Simple, brilliant, and completely legal under international law. Because European troops wouldn't be in a combat zone, they'd be in a safe area, allowing Ukraine to fight its own war more efficiently. Putin was counting on a war of attrition, but Europe just took that advantage from him. But there's a detail in this story that's almost poetic in its irony. Do you remember when I said that Putin is going to pay for all of this? And look, I really meant that. It wasn't a metaphor. Europe froze about $300 billion in Russian assets. It's money from the Central Bank of Russia, which was invested in Europe. When the war started, the European Union froze everything. Now, here's the masterstroke. That money is sitting still, but it generates interest. And Europe decided to use that interest to finance Ukraine. Millions and millions of dollars being transferred every year. Buying ammunition, drones, Patriot air defense systems. Putin is literally financing the weapons that are being used against his own army. Every missile that hits a Russian position, every drone that destroys a tank, is being paid for with Russian money. The irony is brutal. Think about that. Russia is losing an entire division of soldiers every month, according to intelligence reports. And the money that could be rebuilding the Russian economy, is being used to make those losses even greater. But the story gets even more interesting when we look at Putin's allies. Because while Europe is coming together, Russia is discovering that friendship in geopolitics comes at a price. Let's talk about China, for example. Russia and China officially have an unlimited partnership. That's what Xi Jinping and Putin announced weeks before the invasion. An eternal friendship, brothers against the West. But in practice, well, that's another story. Russia built the massive Power of Siberia gas pipeline for China. It was supposed to be a symbol of cooperation, but today it's a symbol of dependence. Russia sells discounted gas to China due to lack of other buyers, and China takes advantage of this. There are plans for a second pipeline, but the Chinese are in no hurry. They want bigger discounts. Russia lacks bargaining power, and its trade situation is even worse. China exports smartphones, cars, advanced technology. Russia exports gas, oil, and minerals, in other words, raw materials. The relationship has become colonial. Russia is the supplier of cheap resources. China is the industrial power that sets the terms. And there's more. The Chinese yuan has replaced the dollar in Russian trade. Seems like a win against the West, right? But what this means in practice is that Russia now depends on the Chinese banking system. The Chinese government controls the flow of Russian money. Now, there's something that must be even more painful for Putin. After all, why isn't China helping more? Why doesn't it send weapons, military technology, real support? And the answer to that question is in Europe, the same Europe that's mobilizing 800,000 soldiers. Because 59% of Germans now see China as an economic threat. And Europe is sending a clear message to China. If you support Russia militarily, our trade partnership is over. China, in turn, looks at all this and certainly does the math. On one side, Russia, an increasingly weaker partner that buys at a discount. On the other, the European Union, the most profitable market in the world. The choice is obvious. So, what does China do? It sends some pieces of equipment that have multiple purposes. Semiconductors that can be used in drones, components that have civilian uses, but also military ones. It does enough not to abandon Russia completely, but it's far, very far from the support that Putin needs. And North Korea? Putin is importing North Korean ammunition, shells that have been stored since the Cold War, equipment that even North Korea itself doesn't want to use. That's not strength, it's desperation. Meanwhile, Ukraine is receiving Taurus missiles from Germany. Missiles that could reach the Kremlin if necessary. Russia is using rusty ammunition from Pyongyang. This contrast shows the scale of the strategic shift we're witnessing. But now comes the important question. When exactly is this going to happen? Or is it just a threat to force Putin to negotiate? Let's look at the concrete signs. The United Kingdom has already confirmed. British troops will enter Ukraine as soon as there is a ceasefire. It's not if, but when. Germany has allocated 3 billion euros in the 2026 budget specifically for support to Ukraine. You don't allocate billions long-term if bluffing. There's more evidence. Marco Rubio, Donald Trump's representative in the negotiations, took part in meetings with the European coalition. He left saying that the talks were very positive. That's very significant. Why? Because, until recently, the situation was completely different. There was a peace plan being negotiated in secret. It had 28 points. And basically, it asked Ukraine to surrender, leave NATO, reduce its army, and accept losing territory. Europe saw this plan and gave a resounding no, and forced a complete revision. The new plan has 19 points, but now it includes a European military presence, real Western guarantees, real security. Europe turned the game around. What was once Ukrainian surrender has turned into a plan with European troops and security guarantees. And apparently, even the Trump administration is accepting this new reality. As you can see, Putin made a bet. He bet that the West was weak, that Europe was divided, that time was on his side. He believed his own propaganda, but the reality is the opposite of everything he imagined. Europe didn't just refuse to give up, it also armed itself. Germany not only moved past pacifism, it led the military response. NATO didn't split, it expanded. Meanwhile, Russia finds itself in an increasingly isolated position. It's losing soldiers it can't replace, spending money it doesn't have, and relying on allies who charge a high price for their friendship, and discovering that the assets it had abroad are now funding its own enemy. Putin wanted a quick war, but got a long one. He wanted to divide the West, but united Europe. He wanted to weaken NATO, but made NATO grow. The cold wind in the Kremlin isn't winter, it's reality knocking at the door. And you? What do you think? Should Europe really send troops to Ukraine? Or will that escalate the conflict too much? Leave your opinion in the comments. If this video helped you better understand what's going on, share it with someone who needs to know about this. Subscribe to the channel to catch future analyses. See you next time.